They called me the dumb one my entire life. At family dinners. At corporate events. In rooms full of people who smiled while agreeing I didn't belong. I was the daughter you apologize for. The employee you underpay because she should be grateful just to be there. The sister you let sit quietly while you inherit everything she helped protect. And the night they finally erased me, publicly, proudly, I smiled. Because they thought humiliation was the end of my story. They didn't realize it was the moment I stopped asking to be seen. If you've ever been underestimated. If someone decided your value without ever listening. If you were told, directly or subtly, that you weren't enough. Stay with me. Not because this is a revenge story. But because it's about what happens when silence turns into leverage. And if part of you already knows what it's like to be doubted, tap like, not for me, but for yourself. Leave a comment, not to explain, just to say, I see it too. And subscribe, because some stories don't scream their power. They wait. I am 28 years old, and for most of my life, people have mistaken my silence for emptiness. I arrive at Right Dominion Properties before sunrise, not because anyone expects commitment from me, but because no one notices when I'm early. The building smells like polished stone and old money, and I know every corridor better than the executives who inherited their confidence along with their last names. My job title is deliberately forgettable. Operations support. Low salary. No authority. A position designed to keep me visible enough to control, but invisible enough to ignore. Dyslexia taught me early that words can betray you, but people always reveal themselves. While others talk, I listen. While they interrupt each other in meetings, I watch who never gets interrupted. I notice who stiffens when numbers are mentioned, who avoids signatures, who laughs too loudly when praised. My father calls my condition a flaw. My mother calls it a limitation. I call it training. When you grow up underestimated, patterns become louder than insults. My sister Claire shines upstairs, surrounded by glass walls and applause. I stay below, fixing mistakes no one admits to making, correcting figures quietly, stabilizing cracks they pretend don't exist. What I value most isn't the company or the name, it's my grandmother's voice, still sharp in my memory. Power doesn't announce itself. It waits. Every humiliation sharpened my patience. Every dismissal taught me timing. And I could feel it, the structure holding my family together was weaker than they believed. The question was never if it would break. Only who would be standing when it did. My father, Richard Wright, built his authority the same way he built buildings, tall, cold, and designed to intimidate anyone standing below. As CEO of Right Dominion Properties, he liked to say the company was worth over $90 million because of discipline and standards. What he meant was control. Titles. Degrees framed on walls. A last name spoken with the right amount of reverence. In his world, intelligence was something you proved with credentials, not results. And since I struggled to read out loud as a child, he decided very early who I would never be. He never raised his voice at me. That would imply emotion. Instead, he smiled when correcting me in public, turning my mistakes into lessons for others. Elena means well, he'd say at board-adjacent events, hand on my shoulder like a warning. But she's not built for complexity. People laughed softly, the polite kind. I learned that humiliation didn't need cruelty, it just needed witnesses. At home, it was worse. Conversations paused when I entered the room. Decisions were announced after they were made. My father spoke about me, never to me. When I tried to contribute, he would tilt his head slightly, the way someone listens to a child mispronounce a word, and then redirect the conversation as if I hadn't spoken at all. What hurt most wasn't his certainty. It was how easily everyone else adopted it. Because once a powerful man decides who you are, the real danger is how many people stop questioning him. The first injustice wasn't dramatic. That's how I know it mattered. It happened during a quarterly review, one of those meetings where decisions are supposedly made, but only by the same three voices. I had spent weeks cross-checking leasing projections for a new development in Austin. I noticed a discrepancy buried deep in the numbers, subtle enough to pass unnoticed, dangerous enough to cost millions over time. I rehearsed how to explain it in my head, slowly, carefully, choosing clarity over speed. When the moment came, I spoke. My father didn't even look at the screen. He looked at me. "Elena," he said gently, "this is too advanced for you. Let's not confuse the room." The room went quiet. Not shocked, comfortable. Someone cleared their throat. My sister avoided my eyes. The meeting moved on. 10 minutes later, another executive raised the same concern, almost word for word. My father nodded approvingly. "Good catch," he said. They wrote it down. They praised him for his insight. No one mentioned me again. I sat there, feeling something unfamiliar tighten in my chest. Not anger. Recognition. I realized then that my role wasn't to fail, it was to be erased. My work was acceptable as long as my name wasn't attached to it. They needed my competence, but never my presence. That was the unspoken rule. I said nothing. I smiled when the meeting ended. But inside, a question started forming: how many times had this already happened without me noticing? The humiliation came dressed as celebration. It was a charity gala, black tie, crystal glasses, speeches about legacy and vision. My father loved these events because they gave him an audience trained to applaud. I stood near the back of the room, wearing a dress my mother had chosen because it was appropriate, which meant invisible. Claire was radiant, orbiting donors and executives like she belonged at the center of everything. I was there to hold her coat, remember names, and not speak unless spoken to. At some point, my father took the microphone. He talked about succession, about excellence, about the future of the company being safe in capable hands. Then he smiled in my direction. The pause was deliberate. "Of course," he said lightly, "not all children are meant to lead." Laughter rippled across the room. My mother laughed too, softly, as if it were an inside joke everyone was allowed to share. I felt my face warm, but I didn't move. I learned long ago that reacting was exactly what he wanted, a visible confirmation of weakness. Claire glanced at me and smirked, lifting her glass in a mock toast. In that moment, I understood something important: humiliation was a performance, and I had been cast as the punchline. They needed me to play that role so their story made sense. I went to the restroom afterward and stared at my reflection, practicing neutrality. No tears. No shaking hands. Just control. Because if they believed they had already broken me, they would never see me watching them this closely. And that's when it became clear, they weren't laughing with me. They were laughing because they thought I would never fight back. The real loss came quietly, disguised as a necessary adjustment. One morning, I was called into my father's office. No warning. No context. Just my name spoken with that calm tone he used when he had already decided the outcome. He slid a paper across the desk without looking at me. A termination notice. Effective immediately. He said my role was redundant, and that keeping me employed could confuse investors about the company's standards. I didn't argue. I already knew arguing only gave him pleasure. What hurt wasn't the job, it was the way he erased my history with a single sentence. Years of fixing errors, protecting margins, staying late in silence, reduced to nothing. My mother sat beside him, hands folded, eyes distant. She didn't say my name once. My sister wasn't there. She didn't need to be. She had already won. That same afternoon, the news spread through the company before I reached the elevator. People avoided eye contact. A few offered pity. None offered truth. By nightfall, my father made it official, announcing publicly that I was no longer part of the company or the future. He said it with pride. As if cutting me out proved something about his strength. I went home with a box of belongings and an unfamiliar thought settling in. They hadn't just fired me. They had erased me on purpose. And I needed to understand why now. After they erased me, the world became unbearably quiet. No meetings. No emails. No reason to wake up early. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, pressing against my chest like proof that they were right all along. I stayed in my apartment for days, curtains half closed, replaying moments I had once minimized to survive. The laughter. The interruptions. The way my name was always said like an apology. Without the structure of the company, I had nothing to distract me from the truth I'd avoided for years. They had never planned for me to belong. I stopped answering calls. Not that there were many. My mother left a voicemail reminding me to rest and not take things personally. My father said nothing. Claire sent a single message, "You'll land on your feet somehow." It felt less like encouragement and more like a conclusion already written. I realized then that isolation wasn't a side effect of what they did. It was the goal. Alone people doubt themselves faster. At night, my thoughts circled the same question, what if they're right? Dyslexia had made me doubt my own intelligence my entire life. Without a title or salary, the doubt grew louder. But beneath it, something else stirred. Anger, yes, but controlled. Focused. I remembered my grandmother's voice again, steady and precise. Power waits. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't collapsing. I was recalibrating. And somewhere in that silence, I understood this wasn't the end. It was the moment before choosing how to respond. There was a moment, quiet, almost disappointing, when I realized I wasn't going to explode. No confrontation. No dramatic phone call. No desperate attempt to prove them wrong. Rage would have been easier. It would have justified everything they believed about me. Instead, I felt something colder take its place. Clarity. I saw my family the way they truly were, not as parents or a sister, but as a system built on hierarchy and fear of exposure. I asked myself a simple question, what do they rely on most? The answer wasn't money. It wasn't reputation. It was the assumption that I was harmless. That I didn't understand how power moved, how decisions were hidden, how trust was manipulated. My invisibility had protected me longer than I realized. They spoke freely around me. Signed things without explaining. Treated me like furniture. So I made a decision that scared me more than losing everything. I would stop trying to be seen. I would let them believe they had won completely. I went quiet online. I stopped correcting people. I didn't defend my name. Every instinct told me this looked like defeat, and that was the point. Because when people think you're done, they stop guarding themselves. They stop checking their reflections. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing leverage. And I knew one mistake, one emotional slip, could ruin everything before it even began. Once I disappeared, they relaxed. That was the most revealing part. My absence didn't create concern, it created comfort. I heard through former colleagues that my father had been congratulated for making a hard but necessary decision. Investors liked the clarity. The narrative was clean now, the capable daughter rising, the problematic one removed. Claire was everywhere, interviews, panels, glossy photos framed as the future of right dominion. And in every story, I was a footnote that no longer mattered. From a distance, I watched without reacting. I studied patterns the way I always had. My father grew bolder when unchallenged. He spoke more. Promised more. Signed faster. My mother appeared less often, her presence reduced to ceremonial smiles. Claire mimicked my father's language perfectly, but not his instincts. She repeated conclusions without understanding how he reached them. That told me something important, she had inherited the spotlight, not the structure. What fascinated me most was how often my name came up when they thought I wouldn't hear. At least she's gone. This is better for everyone. Their relief wasn't cruelty, it was fear finally soothed. Fear that someone they underestimated had been close to the truth. Once that fear disappeared, so did their caution. I didn't correct the story. I let it harden. Because the more certain they became, the less they noticed the cracks they were creating themselves. I learned to observe without touching, to listen without speaking. Every decision my father made, every contract my sister signed, every casual remark my mother dropped, I stored them all. Patterns emerged. Where my father sought control, he left blind spots. Where Claire tried to perform intelligence, she left inconsistencies. My mother's absence was a tool I could map. I watched their confidence grow, and I realized something vital: power without awareness is fragile. They believed they had removed me entirely, but they hadn't accounted for patience, for memory, for quiet strategy. Every word they uttered, every signature they signed too quickly, became a piece of evidence I could use. It wasn't about rushing. It wasn't about acting before the time was right. It was about knowing. And the more I watched, the more I felt the invisible balance of power slowly tipping in my favor. The question that kept me awake at night wasn't if I would act, it was, when will I strike, so they never see it coming? I didn't announce myself. I didn't send threats. I moved like a shadow, deliberately, invisibly. My first step was small but precise. I requested access to the company archives under the pretense of organizing old documents for the board. No one questioned it, they assumed the task was tedious, unimportant. But inside those dusty files, I found patterns my father had overlooked: approvals signed without oversight, contracts that contradicted past commitments, notes in my grandmother's handwriting that hinted at her real intentions for the company. Every detail mattered. Every overlooked signature became ammunition for a plan only I could see. I cross-referenced quietly, confirmed every fact, stored every email, every ledger page. I wasn't just preparing a case, I was building a map. A map that could overturn years of assumed hierarchy. By the time anyone realized I was back in their world, it wouldn't be a fight. It would be inevitability. And yet, even as I worked, I felt a question coil in my chest: will they ever see it coming before it's too late? Just when I felt my plan was secure, a complication appeared. An unexpected audit from a high-profile investor threatened to expose my research before I was ready. My carefully gathered evidence, contracts, signatures, and my grandmother's notes could be questioned or dismissed if discovered too early. Panic whispered that I had overreached, that months of patience could unravel in hours. I spent nights pacing my apartment, rechecking every page, every calculation, every timeline. The fear wasn't public humiliation this time, it was losing control. For the first time, I considered giving up, letting them believe I had vanished for good. But surrendering would erase everything my grandmother had trusted me to protect. I reminded myself of her words: power waits. Not for luck, not for coincidence, only for those who endure quietly. I tightened my control, adjusted my plan, and decided to act slower, smarter. Because one wrong move now wouldn't just delay my victory. It could erase me entirely. And I couldn't afford that. To move forward, I had to let go of something I had treasured for years: my anonymity. Up until now, I had remained invisible, silent, a ghost in the company I once called home. But staying hidden would no longer protect me. If I wanted to claim what was rightfully mine, I had to risk exposure, and with it, ridicule, doubt, even attacks from my own family. I gave up comfort. I gave up the safety of watching from the sidelines. I accepted sleepless nights, anxious mornings, and the gnawing uncertainty that one misstep could destroy everything. I reminded myself, strategy requires sacrifice. Power is never free. I also had to sacrifice the fantasy of reconciliation. I would never again rely on their approval or care for my validation. Their judgment no longer mattered. Only my plan did. I knew that once I stepped into the light, there would be no turning back. And yet, for the first time in my life, I felt fully alive, fully prepared. Because some victories demand silence first, and courage second. The night had come. Every piece was in place, every detail calculated. I requested an emergency board meeting, citing urgent clarifications on long-overlooked documents. They didn't suspect me. They never suspected me. My father smiled at the request, thinking it trivial. Claire rolled her eyes, dismissive as ever. My mother was absent, conveniently occupied. When the meeting began, I spoke clearly, confidently. I presented evidence they couldn't deny, approvals my father had signed to override my grandmother, contracts executed against her explicit instructions, and ledger entries proving mismanagement hidden under the guise of efficiency. Each slide, each page, each quote from my grandmother's handwriting landed like a hammer. I watched their expressions shift. The smirks faded. Confidence faltered. Fear flickered. And when the lawyer, the one who had safeguarded my grandmother's will, confirmed the authenticity of a secret document granting me 51% of the company, the room went silent. For the first time, my father's calm demeanor cracked. He realized too late, I wasn't the weak, slow daughter he had written off. I was the one holding the power he had spent a lifetime pretending to wield. And the question lingered in the air, sharp and heavy, how does it feel to finally be outmaneuvered by the child you underestimated? The boardroom felt impossibly still as I watched them process what I had revealed. My father's face, usually unreadable, tightened with disbelief. Claire opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, realizing her words carried no weight. My mother's eyes darted nervously, her distance offering no shield now. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand apologies. I simply laid out the facts, piece by piece, letting the evidence speak louder than any accusation. The lawyer confirmed every clause, every signature, every intention of my grandmother's will. It was undeniable, I was now the majority shareholder, the one with ultimate influence. When I proposed a vote of confidence for my father as CEO, it wasn't vengeance, it was protocol. The board, swayed by truth and clarity, voted unanimously against him. Weeks later, he resigned. Claire lost her assumed inheritance, her influence reduced to what the law and merit allowed. I had won without theatrics, without shouting, without proving my intelligence to anyone but myself. The room understood it, even if no one said it aloud, I had been underestimated for a lifetime and now I had the power. And yet, the question lingered quietly, what would I do with it next? I didn't become CEO. I didn't need the title to claim my victory. Instead, I chose the role that allowed me to guide the company strategically, shaping its future without becoming a target. I could finally operate on my own terms, free from the weight of approval I had spent decades seeking. The family I had known for 28 years, the ones who laughed at me, excluded me, erased me, were now distant figures in my life. My father's resignation left him socially isolated, his pride intact only to himself. Claire struggled with her diminished status, forced to confront the gaps in her understanding that years of privilege had never challenged. My mother's indifference became a mirror I no longer looked into. And me? I built my identity from the ground up, quietly, deliberately, in a way no one could undermine. The company thrived under my influence, but more importantly, I thrived. I had been labeled the dumb one, underestimated at every turn, humiliated for my differences. Yet I had outlasted, outthought, and outmaneuvered them all without losing my integrity. I learned that intelligence isn't measured by diplomas or public praise. It's measured by patience, vision, and the courage to act when no one believes you can. And now I ask you, those who have ever been doubted, dismissed, or erased, are you waiting to be noticed, or are you ready to take what's yours in silence?